to the first block of the concurrent sessions of the day. I think we have probably one of the heaviest attended, probably. Everybody's excited to hear from Evan this morning, giving us some more detail on the governor's plan for broadband. So I have a really nice, well-written list of all of the things that I'm supposed to share with you all this morning, and I'm like, I'm going to look pretty stupid if I sit up there and read that whole thing, but I must have left out stuff yesterday when we did that. But my name is Charlie Stacy. I'm with the Tazewell County Board of Supervisors. I want to welcome everybody this morning. We have a great program for you this morning. As you probably just heard a little while ago from the governor, there is an extended effort for the expansion of broadband all throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I suspect that is an area that we all have an interest or a need in. So we are pleased to share with you this morning Evan Feinman, who's going to share with you his new charge from the governor to help with the deployment of broadband throughout the Commonwealth. Evan probably doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, but for those of you that don't know, Evan has previously served as the Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources, the Policy Director for the Charity McAuliffe Campaign, and the Deputy Policy Director for Government Transition. Evan's worked on multiple campaigns at state and federal level, and has worked at the Commonwealth Institute, a budget and fiscal policy think tank in Richmond. Prior, Evan received his bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia and his law degree from Washington Lee University School of Law. A Lynchburg native, he currently resides with his wife, Elise, in Richmond, and he's going to come and share with us some wonderful stuff on the expansion plans for broadband. He's got comments he's going to share, and then yesterday we just kind of opened the floor up to the steering committee, and then the meeting took care of itself with all of the questions that everybody had. So we'll do that. Don't let me forget somebody at the end to hold up this green card again. Breakout would really appreciate you taking just a few minutes. The cards are by the door on your way out to share with them what you thought of this particular program. And with that, please help me in welcoming Evan Feinman. Evan?
Fill out the forms. It's really hard to put on a conference like this, and the BACO staff does a great job, and that kind of feedback helps them. And you don't have to say nice things about me when you fill it out. If you do, put your address there. I'll send you a check.
Just on broadband.
Yeah, well, we'll get there too. Do I need that? Can you guys hear me? Okay. So, morning, I'm Evan Feinman. I wear two hats. I don't know that I can, as a general statement, recommend two full-time jobs, but I am really enjoying both, and I'm grateful to the governor for the opportunity to be of service in a couple of different ways. Wearing my first hat, I'm the director of the Tobacco Commission, or the Tobacco Region Revitalization Commission. A bunch of y'all know our work, often the communities that are in our footprint or nearby. For those of you that don't, I don't sell cigarettes, I can't help you with that. What the commission is when the various states' attorneys general sued the tobacco companies in the late 90s for misleading the public about the health impacts of cigarettes, Virginia took a portion of that money and created an economic development organization to focus on Southside and Southwest Virginia, which had really been walloped by the loss of the tobacco industry, the declining coal industry, the lack of furniture, textiles, really a number of big macroeconomic hits had impacted that part of the Commonwealth. Not the only part of the Commonwealth that struggles, but a part of the Commonwealth that is challenged nonetheless. And in general, the Commission invests in three things. It invests in direct corporate attraction. That's the kind of economic development most people know and think about, right? Go meet a company, convince them to move somewhere, cut them a check. We invest in workforce development, both meeting capital needs for our higher education partners and directly buying down the cost of credential acquisition for residents in our part of Virginia. And then finally, we invest in infrastructure. And that can be sites, industrial sites, that can be buildings, and that has been broadband. So the Commission, over the past, decade or decade and a half, has put right around $140 million into broadband expansion across southern and southwest Virginia. Much of that was backbone and middle mile investment, in large part through the creation of the Mid-Atlantic Broadband Corporation, through investments in a variety of municipal systems in Southwest, and support of the private sector. That was because Southern and Southwest Virginia were, unlike much of the rest of the Commonwealth, actually lacking in that backbone and middle mile infrastructure. So we had to solve that, and then we got recently into the last mile provision, and in May of this year, we finally approved $11 million worth of incentive grants that are going to connect around 31,000 homes and businesses. So that's a huge bite out of the total population that needs broadband connectivity, and it's a very, very efficient use of public dollars. It's very rare that you can manage to get that many folks connected to that small a spend. Now that's just the public side. Of course, the private sector and local partners were bringing in some resources as well. I'm also, so that's my one hat, wearing my other hat, I'm the governor's chief broadband advisor. And conferences like this are actually really important to that work. We cannot do it alone. I am inadequate to that job. The governor is inadequate to that job. An effort like acquisition of universal broadband is going to look a lot like rural electrification. It's going to mean a lot of folks putting their shoulders to the wheel, getting this thing done, and a broad recognition that we will all benefit thereby. The fact of the matter is, we have a huge amount of time, we have a huge amount of resources in parts of Virginia that are left out of the modern digital economy. Those are Virginians. There's a lot of reasons to support them, and I'll talk about that in a second, but they're also stranded assets. Purely economically, it's an opportunity, not a cost. And in fact, the value of broadband provision immediately becomes clear. When you take a piece of property, and this should perk up a few years here in county governments, when you take a piece of property that did not have broadband connectivity, the moment the fiber or the radio signal gets to that property, it sees a high single-digit property value increase that second. So the amount of wealth we can create just by expanding broadband is tremendous. So we know expanding broadband is an economic necessity. It allows people to fully and completely participate in the modern economy. It allows communities that have access to it to compete for businesses and to allow the folks that live in those counties to live the lives that they want to live and to grow their own indigenous businesses. It's also a political and a social necessity. I'm sure y'all hear all the time from your constituents that they want broadband access. It's the single loudest group of folks with a discrete ask. A lot of people have general policy things that they want. This is something real, concrete, that they either got or they don't have. Whether you're any kind of elected official, if you're civically engaged, if you're just going to meetings, this is something people talk about. So it's an economic necessity. It's a civil and it's a social necessity. And then the last thing, and I think this gets overlooked too often in politics generally, and on this question specifically, it is a moral necessity. The fact of the matter is, children who are born into communities that don't have access to broadband, even when they have good school systems, don't have as good post-secondary results. They don't go to college in as high numbers. When they do, they don't get as much financial aid. They're not getting workforce credentials. They're not going on to better careers. That is unfair. It is not the way Virginia is supposed to work. The kids who get born in one part of Virginia, who have the same talents, the same drive, the same opportunities to succeed in their school systems, don't have the same opportunities to succeed outside of them. And the mom who finishes up dinner and drives her kids to McDonald's so they can do their homework is not a made-up anecdote. And it's not one mom. I've met dozens and dozens and dozens of those folks, the dads too. And they're, won't name names, but they're the incredible McDonald's manager, actually, who in Southwest Virginia, a lot of folks were using the McDonald's parking lot for their kids' homework. They couldn't get a really good Wi-Fi signal. The router was back in his office toward the back of the restaurant. He, on his own time and on his own dime, ran Ethernet cable through his restaurant back up to the ceiling so he could put the router right by the front door so that it would project out into the parking lot. Now that's great. It's good for that McDonald's manager. But why the heck is that something we need to be doing? That's what we got to solve. So we've got an economic necessity, we've got a political and a social necessity, and we have a moral necessity. There's no greater reason, we shouldn't need anything else to say that we should take a really serious look at ending this. And so I've been saying that every opportunity I've gotten. And I am fortunate enough to have the opportunity to speak to folks fairly frequently. And so you say something loudly and often enough, and in the same spirit of the tall blade of grass getting cut, the governor said, well, Evan, you're awfully heated up about this, why don't you go do it? So he appointed me this summer the chief broadband advisor, and then Courtney Dozier, who is the chief deputy of the Department of Housing and Community Development, the deputy broadband advisor. And we really are very focused on working with all of our stakeholders to get this done, and in particular, local government partners are going to be a key part of this. We simply can't do it without them. You have resources and knowledge that can't be replicated anywhere else. The problem is really large. So there's something like 1,050,000 rural Virginians. Right around 2/3 of those folks don't have access to a reliable high-speed internet connection. So we're talking about 660,000 folks. A set of them have been served either by their towns or by creative enterprises, but then any gains we make there we actually lose because there still exists significant pockets of urban lack of access. And so we're still looking at right around 2/3 of a million Virginians who don't have access to this critical piece of infrastructure. The specifics of where those folks are is an incredibly challenging question. So many previous efforts, and there have been many very well-intentioned efforts to solve this problem before, got bogged down in this scoping and mapping question. And you hear it a lot. What's the map look like? The maps that people give to the FCC are terrible. They are. The maps that we've generated at the state level aren't very good. I want to give those folks credit. It's hard to do, but yeah, they're not very good. It's very difficult to do this. And for many years, people quite sensibly said, well, it's this huge problem. We need to know its nature and extent before we can start to really solve it. And that's a very sensible thought that just in this one instance happens to be wrong. The fact of the matter is, I don't know where every single person and premises is that doesn't have access to broadband. I know where a heck of a lot of them are. And we took some inspiration from the last gubernatorial administration in an effort for which I think they didn't talk about it enough and they don't get enough credit. During the McAuliffe administration, some folks were able to functionally end veterans' homelessness. There are no homeless vets in Virginia that have been identified. What they say is functionally, right? Because similar to the difficulty of figuring out where every single house, structure, business that doesn't have broadband is, it's very hard population to track, so are homeless folks. They literally don't have an address. So what they said is, well, we're going to functionally end it, which is to say every single person we know about, we're going to get housed, and the moment we find more people, we're going to house them too. So that's going to be the approach we're going to take on broadband. We don't know where every single structure is that doesn't have access to the internet. But we know where hundreds of thousands of Virginians are jumping up and down, waving their hands, saying, okay, you don't know everybody, but I'm right here. I'm telling you, please get me connected. So we're going to have a bias toward action. We're going to focus less on plans and more on connectivity. And every single year that goes by, hundreds of thousands more Virginians, or at least tens of thousands of Virginians, but hopefully hundreds of thousands more Virginians will be connected than more before. And if we get to a point some years hence when we stand up and we look around and we go, gosh, I can't find anybody who wants to get broadband internet access, it's possible that at that point we'll engage in some kind of mapping exercise and try to find every barn and honey cabin that have a connection and hook them up. I would think that's not maybe the best use of our resources and that there's some other things we can do. So we're going to call it functionally completed at that point. But that's an important distinction, is that what we're not trying to do is cover every acre. We're not trying to cover every structure. We're trying to cover every Virginia. And where folks live and whether or not they have access and where they work is critically important. We are going to need significant political will to get this done. There is a broad belief that it's a good thing to have done. There's a broad belief that it would be a nice thing to have. We're going to need to spend some money to get it done. And in fact, the governor's going to be introducing his budget in mid-December, and that budget will include a significant increase in state support for broadband funding. I can't tell you exactly what that number is. I don't know it. But we do know that it will be somewhat larger than what we've got. That's going to express itself really in two ways. The Tobacco Commission is self-funded. The Commission is going to continue to churn along doing $4 to $5 million of broadband, last mile broadband expenditure per year. The primary vehicle by which we'll be distributing state support is the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, or VADI. Or VADI, but VADI sounds better to me, I don't know about y'all. That program is a grant program, and it is designed to build out infrastructure in the context of a public-private partnership. So what we know is that most unserved areas are areas where if you could buy down or reduce the cost of the infrastructure to serve folks, there's enough folks there that their subscriptions cover the maintenance, marketing, ongoing support, and eventual equipment upgrades that are necessary to maintain the network. That's almost everybody. We're lucky in that way. That's almost everybody. There are very few people who are so sparse that some technology can't reach them affordably on an ongoing maintenance basis. So what we've said is, for those areas that fall into that category, which is most places, if you have a large unserved population, what you need to do is we need a private sector provider, and that could be traditional telecom, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a subsidiary of an electric co-op, it could be any number of actors, right? It just has to be somebody who isn't taxpayer supported. And then we need a local government, and that is the public-private partnership. Those two folks need to come together and agree on a project that will serve their area, and then come to us. And there's a few reasons that's a really important model. The first and the most critical is that this way we're not just at the state level running around with a bunch of companies who maybe have a presence in the y'all's community, maybe don't, and deciding on your behalf where there's going to be expansion and where there's not. We don't want to do that. We don't know the populations of your county as well as y'all do, and it would be frankly ridiculous for us to sit in Richmond and say, all right, this chunk of Western Hanover is going to get some access, but this one isn't. And this area, Matthews, well, that's really pretty. It's along the water. We'll get them some broadband. Maybe not get that wouldn't make any sense. So instead, what we're going to say is, y'all need to be partners at the table as we decide how we're going to do this. The second is by making sure that our private partners are in the private sector, not taxpayer supported. We can get ourselves out from under the necessity of an ongoing expense at the state level or an ongoing expense at the local level. Once we make this capital spend, it's up to the private sector provider to maintain that network, to market it, to hire the network engineers, to go and have the trucks, to go out to the folks' houses and do the installations. All that's off the back of the public. So we make a single capital infusion, and then the network self-perpetuates in the private sector. That's a great model for us because we know exactly what we're spending and exactly what we're not. We know what we're getting, and there's no downstream risks to us. So that's pretty important. And then the final is, that's just a good model. It turns out that public-private partnerships tend to work well. You bring a lot of the strengths of the public sector and a lot of the strengths of the private sector, and you get to pick and choose, so you get to drop the parts that each one doesn't do very well. So we're very excited about that. We're going to be delivering a plan that will outline all of this in much more detail in December. The other part that let me tell you what the plan's going to be. So first, basic, I work for y'all. There's going to be a description of what the heck it is we've been doing for the last couple of months, and it hasn't all been hanging out at the homestead. This is great. The second will be a description of the need for public support and what we're lacking. The third is going to be a set of policy recommendations that will do things to reduce the cost of deployment for the private sector. The government incentive portion of this bill will be great, but there will also be a set of private sector companies who are growing their networks anyway. We want to make sure that we make that as easy for them as possible. We're going to describe, as I just did, our preference for public-private partnerships. We're going to leverage federal funds and public and quasi-public assets. And there's a lot to talk about there. The feds have many programs. Many of them don't have the same guidelines, many of them don't have the same structures, many of them don't have the same requirements. We're going to try internal to state government to smooth that out for folks. So we're going to be putting together a toolkit that will describe all that. We're going to be working with you as you submit projects to us to ensure that every project is as fully leveraged in terms of federal programs as possible. And even if you're not working through our programs, if you're a private sector provider, if you're a county or a city, cities here, I don't think, but if you're a county or a town, we'll help you figure out a federal project even if you're not part of the state programs. We're here to be your partners and resources. And then finally, we're going to talk about the need to ramp up local planning efforts. And this is also of pretty tremendous significance to y'all. As I said, we don't have enough expertise about who your populations are and how specifically they're distributed within your localities. At the same time, I have heard loud and clear in my entire time in politics, and you should thank all of your current advocates at BACO, at no point did it ever occur to us that doing something like an unfunded mandate was a good idea. We're not going to do that. We're never going to do that as a part of this program. Nobody's going to be forced to do anything. Unfunded mandates out the window. This is funded, and it's not a mandate. What we're going to do is, we're going to offer, at no cost to local governments, technical expertise, both within government and in the form of grants, so that you can go, if you don't happen to like our folks, you can go and hire your own consultants. That money will come through community development block grants at DHCD. We're very optimistic that Go Virginia is about to make available its planning dollars for broadband planning. And we're going to significantly increase the amount of technical expertise just within state government to such an extent that it would allow us to engage in 60 different local planning efforts per year. That, between those two things, or those three things, we ought to be able to get most of the Commonwealth covered with a good broadband plan within the next 2 years. We're very optimistic that we can do that. I will add a word of caution. There exist many good technical consultants in the broadband space. Unfortunately, there also exist many bad technical consultants in the broadband space. I cannot, for a bunch of ethical reasons, say this vendor's good, this vendor's bad. But other folks can. So ask around before you hire somebody. It breaks my heart when I see a local government come to me and say, we hired this great person, they only charge us $750,000, and we've got this plan, and the plan isn't really a plan, and the $750,000, if they just put it toward a project with a good provider, you'd be halfway there. You shouldn't spend a ton of money, and in fact, from this point on, you shouldn't spend any money. Well, we should pay for it. And the one way in which it's a little prescriptive, and I apologize for this, I hate that my first instinct as a government actor engaged in a new endeavor was to create a form. So let me just apologize right out of the gate. But we had to, because there's a lot of y'all. So there is going to be a form, and that's the way we're going to ask folks to build their plans. And that's just necessary so that we can aggregate the data. If y'all gave it to me in 140 some different formats, it just wouldn't work. So we're going to say, to get access to these programs starting by date certain. We haven't picked that. I'm sure y'all would like to be farther in the future. It certainly won't be this year. But to get access to these programs by date certain, and probably a year and a half, 2 years would be where we'd be. You're going to need to have a plan or be in the process of constructing a plan. That plan will pay for. That plan can identify what resources you've got, where you've got service, where you don't have service, what your resource gaps are. So we're not saying you got to do it all year round, but we got to figure out what the depth of your need is and what you can bring to the table. And often what you can bring to the table is a lot. So many different localities, it turns out, have a ton of assets already, whether it's in easements, whether it's in land owned civically, whether it's in current control of vertical assets, whether it's in a municipal loop or 2 or 3. Most folks have done an E-rate project or 2. Some of you happen to own the fiber that serves that. In other instances you don't, but it's still there and probably underutilized. There exist a lot of assets at the local level. When we pair them with what we've got through VDOT and what we'll have in partnership with our electric utilities, whether they're investor-owned utilities or co-ops, it turns out that public and quasi-public infrastructure is a huge point of leverage for us. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that once we get into the General Assembly session. Again, I've submitted a bunch of policy ideas to the governor. He is going to let me know which of those are great ideas, which of those are fine ideas, and which of those are terrible ideas. Y'all will never hear about the terrible ideas, but the other ones are all the governor's ideas, and they're going to be great. And so those bills will be coming out in January, and we're going to talk through each one of them. And I have no expectation that the bills that drop at the beginning of the General Assembly session are going to be themselves perfect pieces of legislation. If you see imperfect pieces of legislation, don't sit quietly, but don't get terribly upset. We're very happy to amend these things. Every one of these bills is going to take some doing, and we know that. So please reach out to us directly, reach out to us through VACO, reach out to us through your House and Senate members. We're eager to hear feedback on what we're doing. Finally, and then I want to get into questions and answers because I know there will be a lot. I started out early in this conversation saying that I can't do this on my own. I really can't. I have a pretty good amount of energy. I've got an even larger amount of ideas, and some percentage of those are good ideas. But without a real public push, without a recognition that this is a broadly shared necessity, again, economic, social, moral necessity, we can't do it. So I need y'all to talk to your members of the House of Delegates. I need you all to talk to your members of the state Senate. I need you to reach out to the governor's office and thank them for making this a priority, because we're going to need some political will to get over this hill. But we will all be made better for it. We will be made morally better, and we will be made more wealthy. It is a win across the board. These investments pay for themselves immediately. The ROI on broadband expansion is fantastic. So please reach out to your members of the General Assembly. That is the next critical step. And then after that, please reach out, after they fund all this, please reach out to us and we will support you in a robust planning effort that is going to give us the opportunity to leverage these programs in a way that gets everybody connected. And no more than 10 years is what the governor said. He's been very clear. 10 is like a D-. He will accept 10, but he will not be happy about it. So we're shooting right now for about 7.5 years. I think we can get there, but I'm going to need y'all's help. Thank you very much, and let's do some questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, thank you for coming and for speaking, but I'm a pretty simple guy. And you mentioned rural electrification. That was a century ago.
Yep.
Where the government thought that electricity was an important utility and required that an electric line go by everybody's home for access if they chose to do it.
Exactly.
I do not understand why the state cannot require our monopoly utility carrier to put fiber on every pole and charge everybody the same amount to pay for that fiber, and use the state's ability to buy things at lower cost to do that. That, to me, is a public-private partnership, because then the independent service providers tap onto that fiber, pay a fee to Dominion Energy or whoever else they have to, and serve all of us in a competitive fashion. The purpose of government, the last thing, to me, the purpose of government is to provide the infrastructure that allows the economy to happen. The government decides where the roads go, and they pave those roads, and that allows businesses and people to travel back and forth.
Yep.
It's the same thing to me. So I don't get why it can't be that simple. That what they did 100 years ago, and guess what? The poles are already there.
They are.
So,
Yeah, great question. So the answer is that in some instances we can, in other instances we can't. And so there's a few other important principles that we've got to take into account. First, there exist private sector actors who've made huge investments in their networks. And if the public comes along and undercuts them, that's probably not a proper governmental intervention in the marketplace. Second, those networks already exist. And so publicly funding overbuilding of those networks is also probably not a good use of scarce dollars when there still exist, again, about 660,000 Virginians who don't have access at all. So we want to make sure that we're not overbuilding folks who have existing service. There is downstream going to be an argument about what we might want to do to enable competition, and competition is valuable and will drive down prices. But to my mind, and certainly the governor's mind, while we got hundreds of thousands of folks who don't have any service, we can't be engaged in spending public dollars to get folks double or triple covered. Third, we are actually doing a lot of that. So in the areas where there is not service, right now, the Tobacco Commission's recent funds went in part to some electric co-ops that are building out fiber along their system. There is some complexity with all fibers are not equal, all networks are not the same, they don't all use the same architecture or language, so it's not like a roadway in which, kind of any wheeled vehicle can travel and anybody can go. So you do want to be a little careful building out a huge network and then saying, all right, come play on it, private sector, when a Verizon or a Sunset Digital or a Shentel are all going to have slightly different architectures that might make their ability to use that fiber greater, worse, or non-existent. So we certainly don't want to create an asset that we then can't utilize fully. So that's another major consideration and a reason we want to bring the private actors in. But there is a huge opportunity in the fact of our electric providers. We don't necessarily want to, it would be a pretty major taking to say, all right, Comcast, you're going to lose these customers, you're going to go those to Verizon. These folks are going to go to Cox This is going to be charter, and we'd have to move around a lot of privately held assets. It'd be a huge nationalization and takeover to try to switch from the situation we're in now to a single monopoly provider in each area. That would be a challenge. But again, you're going to see some more policies to make things easier, cheaper, better. Some of those will include working with our partners in the co-op and investor-owned utility and municipal utility space. I can't really preview those for you in a lot more detail, but that idea lives in our policy recommendations, and you'll see it in the General Assembly.
Just, as a member of a broadband authority, I'm struck by the fact that you didn't mention them as an entity that would play a role in the governor's program. So I would like you to talk about that. And the other thing is the 800-pound gorilla not mentioned here was Dominion today. And I'd like you to talk about what role you see Dominion playing, understanding the fact that I understand the gentleman's question before coming up with a silver bullet and one bullet alone in the chamber that's going to address the problem. And the reality is the mosaic is much more complex.
Right.
And there have to be a variety of different actors based on terrain, location, etc. So I'd like you, if you could, to talk about what role you see the governor proposing for broadband authority.
Sure.
And also Dominion.
So I sort of conceived of broadband authorities as falling into that nonprofit side of things. So broadband authority that is not free, provided it doesn't receive ongoing public subsidy, as long as it's operating as an actor that balances its own books, it is eligible to partner with a county or city government and come to us to access these programs. So in the same way a nonprofit would be, in the same way that co-ops subsidiary, ISP subsidiary is eligible, in that way an authority would be eligible. And so, and we'll certainly do everything we can to support authorities who don't want to do that model. So if you want to just keep doing what you're doing, we'll help you access federal funds, we'll help you do a bunch of other stuff. But we have decided that the public-private partnership model is the way that we're going to do the incentivized construction side of things. And again, most authorities are going to be eligible for that. There's a few that are sort of receiving some ongoing subsidies that we'll need to talk about. We may be able to craft a different program to support them. We may not, but I am very cautious about creating a situation where a local government is left holding a big ongoing expense. That's really what we're trying to avoid. So if the authority is structured in a way that doesn't happen or can't happen, very open to it, and there's no reason to feel like that y'all will be excluded. The second question is about Dominion, and I think it's worth remembering that we've got a mosaic of electric providers. So there's a set of municipal providers. We've got a bunch of co-ops that are themselves quite different from each other. And then we've got two investor-owned utilities, both of whom are quite different from each other. So APCO's corporate model and service territory, very different from Dominion's, and they have a very different set of goals. That said, both AEP and Dominion were directed by a piece of legislation that was put in by Danny Marshall in the last legislative session to come up with ways in which they can support the ongoing broadband effort. I've been working with their teams, the team at Dominion and the team at AEP, since the last legislative session, and their reports that they're going to deliver to the General Assembly are going to look a lot like the part of my report that talks about how to best leverage the utilities, and that's not by accident. The question of how specifically we're going to do that is, again, and I apologize, but it's still being tweaked by the governor's office. It's got to be, the details of it need to be his details, not mine. So I would be really speaking out of school if I said, here are the 5 points of that piece of legislation. But yes, we're going to be working with our utilities to make sure that we can best leverage the resources they have, both in terms of technical expertise and the just tremendous amount of infrastructure they already own. And the fact that they're already doing a smart grid build out that is basically the creation of a fiber network within their utility spaces anyways.
I think we all agree on the need, and getting it is one thing, but I think another factor is the cost, and what cost. So you haven't said anything about it. Are there any guidelines for affordability for our citizens?
Yes, so we don't think that we could do a good enough job if we were completely prescriptive there. So what I mean by that is, we're not going to say, this is a price control. If you want to access these programs, you have to charge X or Y. I just don't think we're as good at that as the providers are, particularly given that what they want to do is get as many customers as they can on their networks. At the same time, we certainly want to incentivize the creation of packages and services that are affordable for folks who are low income. So what we've done is, when we look at the projects that we want to support with public dollars, our core metric, the first cut we take of those programs, is going to be number of premises passed per public dollar. That's the core efficiency metric. So that's how we look at it and say, all right, it's high quality enough that we're calling it broadband. It's serving unserved areas. So the best projects at an initial cut are going to be those projects that serve the most Virginians with the least Virginia tax dollars. That's pretty straightforward. But that's not the end of the consideration. So then we have a set of additional adders or detractors from your score having to do with things like, what quality service are you providing? How affordable is the service that you're providing? Are you providing service to an area that is, for topographical or demographic reasons, really challenging to do, right? So if you're doing it in Highland County, I'm going to give you a bump. That's hard, right? Whereas in flatter part, Virginia is a little easier to do. So all of those will be measurable changes to that first sort of efficiency scoring system that we will do. And then at the end of the day, we're going to have to try to make a call. But affordability is very important to us. I will also say, and I alluded to it a little bit in my remarks, that affordability is a challenge. I think, I basically know how to do this, right? We have, as was stated, this doesn't look a lot different from rural electrification. We can get a radio signal or a fiber to everybody's house. The affordability question is hard, and it's hard from a policy standpoint. It would be possible, in the sort of the general use of the word possible, to create something that looks a lot like a LIHEAP program and just buy down the cost of these subscriptions for folks. But that would be an ongoing expense. We wouldn't have any control over its size. The General Assembly is a hard no on that. I don't even need to float it, right? That's just not, that's not going to go anywhere. Nor do I think that's a very efficient way to solve the problem. So I have some ideas about what to do for efficiency. I also think we should do a better job publicizing these programs, both because I think the private sector providers who have them deserve some credit, and because it'll increase utilization of them. A bunch of private sector providers actually have low-income and veteran and disabled folks support programs. So Comcast and Cox, for example, both offer, if you've got a child in the house on free and reduced lunch, they'll give you a $10 comprehensive internet and TV package. That's awesome. $10 a month is still going to be out of reach for a set of folks, but is much more in reach than the $125 I'm paying in Richmond. That is a great program, and they deserve credit for that, and we deserve to hold their feet to the fire and make them live up to it and get every single kid on free and reduced lunch in the Commonwealth on those programs. Let's do it. Some of that is going to be letting your school systems know. And that's a sticky situation, right, because you're advocating for a vendor, but often it's the only vendor, and it's a real opportunity for children. Additionally, the Medicaid program, federal Medicaid, if you are already someone who has service, they will pay for a subsidized subscription for an ISP for you, and will in fact also set you up with some doctor-prescribed digital health doohickeys, like a glucose monitor that talks to your Wi-Fi, blood pressure cuff. All these different things can be provided at low or no cost to Medicaid recipients, as can a subsidy for their bill. It's a federal program. We don't run it at the state level, but it exists. We're happy to share more information about that. And we're actually hoping to work with them next year on some creative uses for that program that might be more efficient for Medicaid and help us solve our problems.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Comcast, you're talking about this free and reduced lunch.
Mm-hmm.
I have a whole school in my district that qualify. All the students are on that program. How do I find out about that? Because Comcast is in that area.
It's somewhere on their website, but I tell you what.
I haven't heard that.
Well, so this may not work either. My second solution is send me an I'm older now. But in all seriousness, send me an email, and what we'll do is I'll connect you to Comcast, and we'll just get that figured out.
All right, the second thing, I'm glad you got a sense of humor. We're having trouble finding private sector who will partner with us.
Where are you?
To beat us. Because we're so rural.
Where are you? I'm sorry, which?
Augusta.
Gotcha.
I think we've talked.
Yeah, so that can be a challenge. And so there are a set of folks who are going to need to do a little more self-help. And we recognize that. And that's an area where an authority can be a solution. That's an area where we may need to put a little more money on the table to try to do some incentivization there. So while the tobacco efficient program is always at no more generous than a 50-50 match, the body program can go up to an 80% match, and so, or an 80% payment. And so while a private sector provider might not be interested in a network in Augusta at half the cost, a lot of them are probably going to be interested in it at 20% of the cost. And so I think we can probably, I mean, I'm a carrots guy more than I'm a sticks guy. I think we can probably get folks to everywhere in the Commonwealth. And in particular, for the more rural localities, don't just focus on old mainline big telecom companies. There are a lot of really impressive, really scrappy, smaller and medium-sized internet service providers, both in the wired and the wireless space. They're doing really good work.
And the last question is, how can we access your work and your progress so that we can stay abreast of it?
So, amusingly, my website is
Don't say
also under
internet.
construction. So we're going to get there. There will be a new wired.virginia.gov, but don't navigate there now. It's not ready yet. But we're working with some vendors who are causing a few problems. But for now, the best thing to do simply is to reach out to me. So I and the rest of my team are very available. I am working all the time, basically. So there is no shortage of opportunity for me to interact with you. The plan will come out in late December. I'm hoping to get it out before the holidays. For anybody who wants to get away from your families, I will provide you a few dozen pages of riveting report that you can read somewhere by the fire. And then beyond that, we will have the wired.virginia.gov site up soon. And so all of those are different avenues. But anybody in this room who talks to anybody else, please don't hesitate. I am very happy to hear from you. So reach out directly to me. I might kick you to somebody else who's better positioned to answer your question, but I'm happy to play at the top. And if I can help you directly, I will.
I understand that some counties contract with Comcast and that the smaller providers can't get in because there's a monopoly of some form. How do we get around that, or can you help with that?
Sure. So usually those contracts are not, those contracts are prescriptive as regards county expenditures. They're not prescriptive as regards serving customers in the county. So I think that would be unconstitutional. I'm pretty confident that the county government can't constrain a second private sector provider from coming in and serving customers. So what you would need to do is you may have a contract provision that would prevent you from doing a county subsidization of that project, which would put you at a disadvantage because our state leverage isn't going to be as good there. But if you get creative and find some third-party funds, whether it's a foundation, hospital foundations are great partners in these situations. If it's a charitable organization, if it's a federal program, you might be able to leverage like the new USDA pilot or even some borrowed RUS dollars. Or if you're in the Appalachian Regional Commission footprint, you could do ARC money. All that matches fine by us. And that can help you get past the leverage problem that you may have. Also, contracts are time limited to lend. Or you can partner with Comcast. Comcast, if you make the numbers work, will do whatever they can do. So, there's no reason not to have them as a partner where they're already providing service and they've got it.
I just need your address and who we, how to
Sure.
get in touch with.
It's E. Feinman, E, that is in Frank, EINMAN, at revitalizeva.org, which is is the domain name for the commission. I declined to create a second email address for this. Doesn't seem helpful.
Your phone number?
Sure. Yeah, fine. 434-509-8522. I'm in a lot of meetings, but I'll call you back.
Could you give us your email again?
Sure, it's E and then my last name, Feinman, at the word revitalize, the letters B and A,
What?
org. There's also a much more complicated one that's my hack. Don't worry about it. That's a great way to get it.
General technology question.
Sure.
I live in rural America, and I know that we could go on for days on this next question, but is it technology that gets through trees?
Oh, yeah. So, well, wires. Great ad. But there are, in fact, wireless technologies that do as well. So, and I should say, we are technology agnostic in our program. Any terrestrial provider that can do the speeds that we require will work. And there are great technologies out there. So each generation of wireless equipment that comes out is better than the last. Additionally, more spectrum has been opened up in the last several years, and including recently a couple of new bands just in the last couple of months. I don't know if that was this month, it's hard to say. Anyway, recently. And the general rule of thumb is that the longer the wavelength, the lower the frequency, the more penetrative a particular signal is. So you've got something like Wi-Fi, it can punch through a wall, but not too probably. And then you go all the way down to traditional radio signals, which have very long wavelengths. You could turn on a radio down here and hear from it. So there's everything in between. The spectrum is broad. The federal government made available a couple more areas of wireless bandwidth. The TV white space projects have been a qualified success. I wouldn't say it's a rip-roaring success, but it's a qualified success. So, and then of course, while trees can be an issue, we got towers and we got antennas. So trees were an issue way back when everybody was on broadcast TV too. And we found a way around it with putting our TV stations on high points and putting aerials on our houses. And I think there's going to be some of that we're going to need to do again.
Just to follow up with that,
Sure.
you talked about white space, and yes, I do live in rural places where we only got one TV station when I was growing up. And you had to go ahead and twist it around to
Yep.
get in. But is this technology, in other words, again, I live in a rural space, but basically the providers are saying they can't do it yet. When is it going to be available, or is it now available?
It's available now. So a variety of different wireless technologies are going to need a solution for our more dispersed populations. It's not going to make as much economic sense. And there's a broad view that that's somehow kind of second-rate internet access. And the fact of the matter is, for the vast majority of customers, that's not the case. You can get up above 25 megabits down, up to 30, even 35 megabits down on a wireless connection. Your upload speeds are going to be lower, but most folks aren't doing a heck of a lot of uploading. So unless you're a graphic designer, or the gaming space can be a little challenging on wireless. But I don't see a lot of video gamers in the crowd. But you never know. And I think video games are great. But the fact of the matter is, there's actually no physics problem that would prevent a wireless technology from ultimately eclipsing fiber. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but they've been making tremendous gains. I don't bet on engineers, because those guys are clever and they've got all day. And so and in fact, radio waves in air travel faster than light does in glass. So there's every reason to believe that investments in wireless broadband technology will continue to pay serious dividends, and I don't think we should be down on it. I think, in fact, we should be excited about it.
Question. Recently, and the state is working on the digitizing of the 911. How or could that play a part in our broadband situation?
Yes, a couple of different ways. So the first is there's this federal program, the FirstNet program, which is a contract that the federal government made with AT&T and they have to build a border-to-border, national, interoperable, every other possible sort of asset you could want, first responder network. And then in startlingly unambitious federal fashion, they made it a 25-year program. But it remains the case that that contract is out there. And we can leverage that working with AT&T. Additionally, there are a lot of non-AT&T public safety vendors that are quite good, and in many instances are already offering interoperable border-to-border coverage. The biggest way that y'all can leverage it is where you don't have coverage. You don't shout that from the rooftops, but you can tell me where there isn't good public safety radio coverage. We can help you, and there are a bunch of programs to help you site a tower there and get backhaul to that tower. That tower doesn't just have to serve your first responders. Tower's a tower. You can put your first responder communication equipment on there, and then you can work with a wireless ISP to put a WISP equipment on there. Or you can use the backhaul if you're getting a subsidy to serve the tower, and you can build fiber lines off of that backhaul as long as you design it properly. All of those are opportunities, and we're happy to talk through if you've got a specific project or a specific gap. Again, and I don't think anybody would do this, but it's worth saying again because we did it. I would probably go ahead and just not comply with the FOIA law, but please don't send me a map of where you don't have public safety radio coverage. Seriously, that's a bad thing to have out in the world.
So when you say broadband, are you using the FCC definition of broadband as your goal?
As a goal, yes, we want to see at least, we want to see 25.3 as a floor. We will support some lower speed projects, particularly in the wireless space, if they have a lot of other things going for them. What we've said is, first of all, we've gotten out of this sort of underserved category. It was just muddying the waters. If you have 10 megabits per second download speed and 1 megabit per second upload speed or less, so if you're at 10.1 or below, you're unserved. What you have is inadequate, it's not broadband, we don't count it, you're unserved. Technologies that exceed that, we will consider supporting, but somebody walking through the door with an 10.1 and a 1.1 project is not going to get very far in our scoring system. So it's not a hard no, we're not saying it must be 25.3, but if that's our strong preference, and in fact, faster speeds do serve you very well in the scoring process. But again, another reason we're particularly willing to accept lower speeds in the wireless space is because we know there's a next generation and a next generation and a next generation of transmission equipment, and every time those things turn over, the speeds get better.
The next question, this other related to speed. I'm from Grayson County, we're part of the Wired Road Authority for Galax, Carroll, and Grayson. Grayson, in conjunction with the Wired Road, released an RFP in October for a public-private partnership. So our timeline is a little bit ahead of where you are, but from these grants and things that you've been talking about, is there a way to recoup some of the money? You know, the Tobacco Commission has given us some money to do some last mile connection, but it's not a huge amount. Is there a way, as we work with you, to say, you know, we're going to move on with this project, but we're ahead of your timeline, is there a way to still participate in these grants moving forward? Does that make sense?
Yes, but. Well, sort of. So what I would encourage you to do, particularly as you're planning it, is just phase it. So do what you can do now in a shorter time frame, call that phase 1,
Right.
and then apply for phases 2 and 3. What we can't do in any grant program, because it opens the door to this huge moral hazard and just set of bad decision making, is if we ever have grant programs that are retroactively paying for stuff that people have already laid out, that puts everybody in a bad position. So we can never look backwards. So any money you spend now, you can't really count. But if you build your project in phases, what we can do is support you when our time frames, when our timelines line up.
Got it.
Could they use that as the match for the next round?
Same problem. If I don't ever want somebody to spend a bunch of local money in anticipation of a grant, because then if it doesn't come through, everybody, it's a problem. So we can't ever be backward looking in our grants on match or on any of those. Man, back.
I don't quite understand how to phrase this project because I don't know all the right technological words.
We'll figure it out together.
Well, figured it out together. we're talking here about localities doing their private partnerships and so forth and so on. But we've had some trouble in our county with people who live close to a county line, and somebody else says that's going to interfere with our program and so forth and so on. And we really need that kind of advice and understanding from Richmond to kind of mediate these things as to what wavelength and so forth, because of these companies, you know, they're territorial too, and they don't want your signal coming into what they consider their territory, and it's a problem.
That's true they don't, and it's also true that it doesn't bother us much. So what we are going to do is, you know, there is a challenge program in our, we do want to make sure we're not overbuilding existing technology. And again, that's not because we're afraid of or anti-competition, it's just because, as I said before, if you got hundreds of thousands of folks with no options, it's not fair to spend public dollars giving folks multiple options. So we do want to make sure that we're careful that we're not doing an overbuild. At the same time, radio signals are just notorious disrespecter of county lines, right? I mean, they almost never stop where you tell them to. So we recognize that that's the nature of a wireless project. And what we will do when we score those projects is where those wireless signals enter into a served area, we just don't count those premises toward this sort of public cost per premises passed metric, which is our core metric. So we're acknowledging that, you know, there may be a free, maybe you're using a wireless technology and it's got a 3-mile, you know, good radius of broadcast, and there's a free tower 2 miles into this area. So you're going to have a sort of a mile out crescent or 2 mile out crescent. There's no reason not to do that project in the most efficient way possible. And if there's a set of folks who then could be accessed by those wireless signals, we're not going to count them toward the core efficiency metric, but we're also not going to kill the project. And we do have a challenge process, and private sector providers are going to have the opportunity to come before us and say, hey, this really isn't that. This is a true overbuild and you shouldn't do it. And we're going to be very open to that. There's going to be 30 days to put that together. We're going to work with folks to make sure it works. We want to be open and transparent about that as well. But particularly in the wireless space, the one exception to that I will say is, and I don't know whether or not we've hit a problem with this yet. There is the National Radio Quiet Zone in West Virginia. We can't be pointing stuff at that. So we do need to do some, but you can engineer around that, in part by kind of sitting on the border and just looking back at Virginia. But that we do have to respect and be careful about.
And I'm wondering if you could share with folks, as your elected officials go back and try and talk to the public-private partnership individuals, we all appreciate the leverage that we may have on the government public side, but I don't think there's a lot of information out there as to the leverage available to the privates, so that if you have information to share as to what leveraging, what federal leveraging is available for your private partner, that's a tremendous resource available to them that your governing body can't access. But if the two combine, you've got tremendous build out. So if you could comment on that.
Absolutely. So we'll be putting together a checklist, and again, I'm sorry this isn't quite ready yet, but we're a new effort, and we're going to get it out there. But that checklist is going to include a variety of other resource areas that you can see. And if you've got an unserved area, and in it or near it is a public safety gap, in it or near it is a school or library, in it or near it is a health center, in it or near it is a central business district, in it or near it is a variety of other different sort of federally eligible spots or actors, there exist federal funds that you can pull down. On top of that, in partnership with the right private sector providers, you can pull down project-specific funds, whether we just did the Connect America Fund 2 auction, and many thousands of Virginians are going to get access to broadband, and that's a partnership between the federal government and a set of providers in Virginia. There are, the USDA, Rural Development Service, has loans. Those are the RUS loans. They've also got what they're calling their pilots. Only the federal government can have a $600 million pilot. It's their new pilot program that's going to be of tremendous use to the most rural localities in Virginia. So if you're a suburban county, those are going to be harder funds to access. But if you're a truly rural locality, that program's really pointed at y'all. And we can help you be good candidates for that. We can help you do it in conjunction with a project that you're going to be applying for state support or not.
The governor's opportunity zones, they've just been announced, and I don't think the rules like yours are in process of being made. Are y'all having any connection with that?
So I don't think the opportunity zones that were created as part of the federal tax reform legislation that came through are going to be high impact in the broadband project. I'm super excited about them in my backup commission meeting because they're a real opportunity. And if you guys haven't read up on those rules really quickly, it's basically a partial or a total alleviation of capital gains taxation for people who make capital investments in these qualifying zones. You sit on your investment for 10 years, you literally pay no cap gains. A lot of people are going to become very wealthy as a result of this, and it's going to drive a lot of capital to lower income parts of Virginia. We've already got people putting together huge funds. These are usually investment manager types that are putting together $100 million, $200 million, $150 million funds specifically to make capital investments in these opportunity zones. You can find the map of opportunity zones if you just Google DHCD opportunity zones, Virginia. Pretty sure every county has at least one. I'd be surprised if y'all didn't. A couple whole counties for opportunity zones. The broadband piece is harder. Most of these folks will not be paying capital gains on the investments that they've made in broadband infrastructure, so I don't know if that's going to be a high impact policy on the broadband project. But for rural economic development, it's great. And please, everybody, do focus on it.
What percentage of the residents that you make available will take it?
Great question, and one that changes a lot depending on time and location. So take rates can be very high, particularly if folks do a good job sort of pre-seeding an area with interest. You could also, I think the Sunset Digital guys just left, but they were in very public litigation or negotiation to buy a network, so folks knew they were coming for years. They have a lot of customers who are ready. In general, I've seen it run about 25–30% in a new build, but then it goes up from there. What happens is folks talk to their neighbors, and their neighbors say, well, we're watching this great show on Netflix. And they say, what's Netflix? And they say, okay, let's start earlier. But you eventually get somebody there, and they'll take the service. The take rates we're not as concerned about. The fact of the matter is, long-term, folks will be using it, and if the current resident of a property doesn't take service, at some point they'll move out. The only opportunity to move somebody new in is going to be if there's broadband access there or not. So we're mostly focused on the can folks get it, not will they get it. Yes, ma'am.
We have sections in our county that don't have cell phone service either.
Yep.
So, and broadband, will there be some connection with broadband, cell service, Wi-Fi?
So these are not the same issue, but they're fellow travelers. Mobile data services are not properly broadband. A few folks in a few situations in a very special contractual obligation might be people who would qualify as people who could receive a broadband signal on their phones. The trouble is, if you've got, it's primarily the model. So one, if you've got, let's say you've got Comcast at home, you could start streaming video, leave your TV on, come to the homestead for this conference, go back. Comcast doesn't care how many bits of data you had flow to your house in a given month. That's just not what your pricing structure is based around. And that kind of uncapped access is necessary for something to be truly broadband. Whereas if I stream HD video to this thing, it's going to be fine for a little while, and then it's going to get throttled, and then I'm going to get throttled when the bill comes. So the thing that we've got to do is make sure that, I thought that was pretty funny. The thing we've got to do is make sure that we're talking about true undata capped broadband service when we talk about it. That's not to say mobile connectivity isn't really important too. And in fact, Robbie DeMaria, who's the Deputy Secretary of Commerce and Trade for Technology, is leading a work group that we're supporting all around mobile access. And in fact, that work group is going to come out with its report around the same time that I do. And you can also co-locate. In the same way your public safety equipment can sit on a tower with wireless broadband equipment, your cellular equipment can sit on a tower with wireless broadband equipment. The real difference in the tech is that cellular towers have to project in all directions, and cellular phones have to be little enough for us to carry them around, even though they've got to talk back to the towers. That kind of transmission and reception is just much less robust than when the transmitter and the receiver know where each other are. You can just have a much more serious and a data-dense signal. There is some reason to believe that in a very small number of areas, 5G will make that leap, but do not believe 5G is some silver bullet. It is not. There's a great deal of hype about it. It will be exciting for the folks who have access to it, but very small percentages of people in only the most dense parts of Virginia and the country are going to wind up being on 5G in the near term. I'm talking the next 5 to 7 years. There's just not going to be a huge 5G rollout.
So I'm presently on Verizon DSL. As this rolls out, will the maintenance of the DSL people who are in the last phase get worse and worse because it's really pretty bad right now?
Probably. I wish I had a different answer to that. We can't compel them to maintain their network properly. The fact of the matter is DSL was a transitional technology. It can't compete really anymore with other delivery services. And Verizon knows that as well as anybody else, and so there's not a great incentive for them to make a bunch of, it'd be like if we were telling Virginia, hey, I'm still using this canal system to get my grain to market. It's still not going to maintain it, right? There's railroads and roads. So DSL is gonna wither and die, would be my prediction. The trick is going to be to make sure that we get folks off it for that.
Follow up to the funding question, even though your program may not be in position to help us initially, will your office be in position to help identify alternative funding sources?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
do you have that capacity now, or?
Yeah, we can do it. If you give us another couple months, we'll be even better at it. But yeah, call me tomorrow and I'll help. Sorry.
Some of us are going to need a little help in explaining this to the people that we work with in the county. Your office is going to have people available to assist with that to come out.
That's me. So I can't. I wish I could. It'd be all I did if I just went to every single county in the Commonwealth and did this same talk. So to a certain extent, I'm going to need y'all to be people who can relay this message. If there are specific questions, happy to answer them. I do have a deputy, and then we're hiring another staffer. There's some folks who are supporting us through CIC as well. So I think, how are we doing? All right.
Those of us that have in some places going to get maybe a webinar.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good idea.
But also, this is being paid. It's supposed to be on the DACO website.
Or wait, hold on, I'm sorry.
We were trying to do a study to see where we had what service. We contacted the providers we did in our area. We get back, say, Comcast, we serve here. So we get this back with everybody's colors. And we look at it, we say, they don't
It's not
have.
true at all.
No, they don't have that down there. Well, they may eventually in the future focus in that area. So help people out. Is there access to the state of a comprehensive,
So, yeah, I agree.
It's not a medical record.
It'd be easier to get medical records. The fact of the matter is they treat it like it's a state secret, and we cannot compel them to turn the maps over, and they're not going to. So,
Why can't we declare the utility as
a whole bunch of reasons. But the thing that we can do is, you knew that that map was BS when you got it. And so what we're going to do is, we're going to work with y'all And as a part of the planning process that I'm going to ask y'all to undertake and financially support, I'm going to ask you guys to do that for us. So you know where there's service and where there's not. Not specifically, we understand there will be some spitballing in it, but that'll become the best map we've got. So what we're going to ask y'all to do is look at your localities, and it may take a little research, and you can have a consultant to help you with this. But what we're going to ask for is a precinct by precinct. This precinct is unserved, this precinct is partially served, this precinct is served. And if we can get that map from everybody, that will become immediately the best map. And it's okay, like, again, I promise, it's okay if you're saying, I have an 80% confidence that this is right. That we get that's what we do, and we don't want it to be a huge and difficult undertaking. But even an 80% confidence map from y'all or your administrators is going to be a much better map than anything anybody has right now.
There are folks in the state that send somebody in to go around and do that survey and all that.
Well, so I don't think it needs to be that comprehensive. So we don't need to do a survey of everybody in the county. I think you were able to look at that map you got from providers and say, I know that's not true. There's no service here. There's no service here. So what we'd ask you to do is just take what's in your heads and put it on the map. And then where you've got specific questions, I'm not sure about here, I'm not sure about here, then yeah, make some phone calls, do some surveys. But we don't need it to be comprehensive. We just need it to be better than what we've got. And it doesn't even have to be that good. It'll be a lot better.
Our school system helped us to do something like that. They sent questionnaires home to the kids. And you were talking about the kids with education. That return rate is phenomenal.
That's a great idea.
All right, we're just about out of time. If our next session will start at about 11:30, so you probably have one more question.
All right, who's it? All right, okay, go ahead.
You mentioned CIT, so what's your interoperability with CIT?
The CIT broadband staff they report to me on this.
Okay, so they're starting to report you. We're in the middle of the.
I mean, they're still CIT staff, I should say.
Yeah.
But on this, in the same way, we've got folks. Courtney is a DHCD. She's a DHCD staffer, but she's my deputy on this.
Yeah, so you will work together.
Yes.
That one was a
I
short
think we
one.
can
Probably
do
get this
it.
last one.
You had talked briefly about the fact that there were some mobile companies that had gone through, I think you said it was Cat 4 or whatever.
Cap 2.
The Cat 2 book. And I believe that all of it that was done was sort of done in the Southwest. I think only one person, one county on the east got anything, and that was in the middle of the peninsula, because it was my county. And I'm trying to figure out exactly, because it seems like we get left behind all the time out on the middle peninsula. Every time something's done, it's sort of the southeast region. My county had to put in its own internet system, and we have one now. I'm trying to, I'm here with my colleagues from the region, because we are looking now at what we can do regionally. But, it's just, are you going to be looking at the Middle Peninsula? I mean, it seems like,
Anywhere that doesn't have service.
I know you're from out in the Southwest, and that seems
Well, I'm from Lynchburg, which is probably the center. But this is statewide, so I have one set of responsibilities when I'm wearing my tobacco commission hat. My broadband responsibility is statewide. Every Virginian is just as important, and every Virginian that doesn't have service is good. All right, thank you guys.